Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray,
And I'm Chris.
and it's the week of Christmas. Christmas 2025 is right here around the corner, just a few days away. So we thought we would jump on and do a quick Christmas episode and looking specifically, I think, at what was Christmas like around the time of the Civil War. Of course, you're not going to be able to get away from the war itself when thinking about this. But we're not focusing so much on the war, just as much as what was Christmas like in the mid 19th century. And Chris, I think our listeners will be interested to know, number one, how different it was, but also in some ways how similar it was.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to remember is that Christmas during the Civil War served as both a reminder, but also an escape from the Civil War. I think everybody was kind of looking forward to maybe a day of rest and relaxation, if you can, on the battlefield for this holiday. But the other thing is that they recognized they were on a battlefield and they were separated from their loved ones. And so while there was some rest, there was also some disappointment with this. And then you had to think about the families that had an empty chair at the table and wondering, would there ever be an opportunity for reunification? And so, yes, there was some good, but there was also some very difficult moments during this time period. And also the fact that, technically during this time before the Civil War, Christmas wasn't necessarily an official holiday. That had been put on the document or on the calendars, and that it wasn't really celebrated uniformly as it is today in the country back then.
Yeah, one of the things that I think people would be surprised to know is that for a long time, even in the United States, Christmas was either celebrated as a very strict religious holiday where people would go to church and things like that, but also it was celebrated very much like we would celebrate New Year's today or the 4th of July, where there was a lot of drinking and partying and things like that going on associated with the holiday. I mean, no better way to celebrate the birth of the Saviors and to go out and drink.
Well, and also,
But they,
you kind of think about the different even religious groups that were out there. You had the Puritans and the Calvinists who in the 17th century abhorred Christmas. And before it became a state, Massachusetts would put a penalty on people, a fine if they found you celebrating Christmas. Schools were still meeting on Christmas Day. There was no break, if you will, and that excuse me, that just shows kind of the religious division that was even there. You mentioned about celebrating Jesus Christ, but then as even in today's society, Christmas meant different things to different people, and there were different expectations surrounding the idea of Christmas, which I guess kind of you see that in today's society where there's this debate or discussion about some people saying Merry Christmas and some people saying Happy Holidays, trying to find or maneuver through that thing. It was the same way back in the early 17th century, but even then leading into the Civil War.
yeah, that tension between I guess you could call it the secular and the sacred, where on one hand you have those who want to make it very religious, centered around church and scripture and prayer, and then you have others who are centering it around other things, maybe uh, drinking, maybe meals, what have you. So around this time, Chris, what I found very interesting was that by the time you get to the Civil War, Christmas is already changing. It's already sort of evolving into something that would be slightly more familiar with our modern audience. You have, in 1843, Charles Dickens published A Christmas Carol, and so you start seeing more attention given to children around Christmas than had previously been given. You see a more recognizable version of Santa Claus showing up around this time as well. So you have Christmas evolving and how people celebrate it evolving during this time, and this seems to be where we're starting to turn that corner in the Civil War era to toward at least not to but toward more 20th 21st century way of thinking about Christmas is celebrating Christmas.
Yeah, I remembered. Sorry, got us. Sorry, that came at the
Yeah,
wrong time. Sorry about that. But I find it interesting let's kind of go back to the South and how Christmas was being looked at in the South. The way that plantation owners treated the enslaved during this
right.
time. There's just a huge, it's just a misunderstanding, if you will, of what the plantation owners were doing because they used Christmas as a way they gave gifts to the enslaved,
Mhm.
gave them everything but freedom.
Yeah.
Would give them drinks and would give them food and would even kind of give them the day off by a way of trying to show gratitude, if you will, for everything that the enslaved were doing. However, I do see that was, I don't know, how could you do that? I mean, I go back on, let's just say it's Christmas, and you're sitting there around the table if you're the plantation owner in your very antebellum mansion, very nice place, and you are enjoying all of the gifts, and then you say, "Well, let me go and give something to those who work for us." But yet, the one thing you won't give them is freedom.
Yeah.
And they try to ply them with grace and goodness by offering them gifts, and where some of the enslaved were thankful for those gifts, in the back of their mind they had to be thinking, the greatest gift you could give us is freedom, which kind of could turn even into the religious aspect because many of the enslaved were very, very religious, and that's kind of how they made their way through the difficult time, and just kind of thinking about the idea of what Christmas means in the religious context of Jesus about giving freedom through his birth. And yet, here you have on that day, the enslaved did not receive freedom. They just received, say, a bottle of alcohol or some food or things of that nature.
Yeah, the slaves are probably sitting there thinking, I like the shirt you gave me for Christmas, but I'd much rather, not be whipped, and have my freedom and that kind of thing. And, sometimes I think some of the slaveholders you mentioned, how could they do that? But I think sometimes with some of the slaveholders anyway, there's this double mind. On the one hand, they view their slaves as property, and they view they'll sell slaves, they'll buy slaves, they'll whip slaves, they'll treat them horribly and very inhumanely. But then on the other hand, they want to sort of talk about their slaves being their part of their family. And you see after the Civil War, one of the things that some Southern slaveholders were shocked by was that their slaves had turned on them during the war. Their slaves had run away. Their slaves had ransacked the plantation or whatever. They were just completely surprised because they had convinced themselves that their slaves were, of course, happy and everything. And of course, you have after the Civil War this idea of the lost cause, this idea that all the slaves were happy, but you know the reality of it was very different. It's like they were not happy, and being given an extra biscuit or a new shirt on Christmas didn't make up for all the other stuff that was happening. And as you mentioned, denial of freedom.
Well, and yes, and even take the whole concept of what was going on with the Civil War as it related to the North and the South, and to young people and to the children. The that children were pretty much given viewpoints on the Civil War through the use of Santa Claus. Santa Claus. There were moms and dads who were basically telling children in the South that Santa Claus wasn't going to come this year because the quote Yankees had shot him. And then you had up north
Sorry,
that
Johnny, Santa can't come today. The Yankees got him.
yes, and then up north, the Northerners would telling their children that Santa Claus was not going to be coming because they were going to be blocked by the Confederate blockade, or by some other pickets or something that was going to hinder the journey. And so you've got that kind of going on too, which just increases the children's angst and ire over the Northerners or the Southerners, depending on what side of the line you were on. And so all of those things are going on to try to spell a narrative of whose fault the Civil War really was. You're not getting Christmas, or is not going to be the best Christmas you've ever had because there's a group of people who are harming us, and therefore Santa Claus isn't going to come, or gifts are not going to come, or freedom's not going to be made available. So, the use of Christmas as a means to justify one's position was on there as well.
And you talk about gifts and Santa Claus, and like I said earlier, you start seeing a more recognizable Santa Claus during this period of the 1860s. But when we talk about gifts, nowadays people, I don't know, after Thanksgiving, what is it, Black Friday, they go on Amazon and they buy all these electronics, and now here in the last few days before Christmas itself, people going to the stores as well, buying all these fancy gifts and everything. But at this time, a lot of those gifts were actually quite modest. A young girl might get a doll, and that doll, maybe her mom or her older sister or grandma or whoever had made that doll. Maybe they had purchased it at a local shop, but it still would have been more of a handmade object than what kids would get today or would even be happy with today. People also sang Christmas carols during this time. That became something that was common. And every year, Chris, our church goes Christmas caroling. I did it one year, but then decided we'll focus on the nursing homes, the local nursing homes. I did it one year, and then I decided those people don't need me and they're caterwauling at them. That's just not something that's not going to make their Christmas merry and bright. So, yeah, I stopped.
It's kind of well, I'm sure that they were as disappointed as the story I read about. There was some, I think it was a Confederate prisoner who was talking about that somebody had sent him a wonderful present, and opened it up, and was like a very nice bottle of brandy. And they were so excited. He had held on to that brandy, and on Christmas morning, he invited everybody over and said, "Hey, we're all going to have a sip of this brandy to celebrate Christmas." And what had happened is that somebody had taken the brandy, opened the bottle, poured all the brandy out, and put water in it, and zipped
Oh,
it back up and wrapped it back up. And so the guy was drinking, water, and he writes that, this precious fluid of, in capital letters, disappointment, because he says, I hope that the Yankee who played that trick on me lives to repent it and get shot in the war before the war is over.
yes. It's like
I
he
mean,
was
that's
very disappointed.
I mean, yeah, I mean, he's very disappointed because, other stories on the battlefield where they would put a small little tree up, in their bunk, and they would put some of that tack on there on the tree instead of oranges and other things, but just something. They wanted to try to have some semblance of normalcy, if you
Yep.
will. Most of the battle was over on that particular day where they chose not to fight, but it was just a reminder of just how bad the country was in. It wasn't necessarily a war over Christmas, but the Civil War had pretty much reduced Christmas to a series or to a season of sadness.
Yeah. These soldiers away from home, away from their families. Unlike today, of course, there's no internet, there are no phones. You write a letter and hope it gets there and hope you get a response. One thing that I did read about when thinking about Christmas at the camp, so to speak, was impromptu truces. And it took my mind back to World War One when they had the Christmas Day truce, and the German soldiers and the European soldiers, going out there and playing soccer or whatever in this sort of neutral territory. I don't know that anything like that necessarily happened during the Civil War, but you did have periods where soldiers from the North or from the South who, had a lot of differences and a lot of things, but at the end of the day, they were both facing Christmas out on a battlefield instead of at home, and sometimes they found ways to to at least show some level of humanity one to the other, I think.
And at the end of the day, I think, we always try to find the good in the bad. And, the war basically was a stark reminder of just how important family was,
Right.
and also how, it was very hard on not just the soldiers on the battlefield, but also the families at home who didn't know if they would ever see, their loved one again. And so it is interesting that when the war ended, that holidays, Christmas, and other events really is what kind of helped blend the importance of reunification for families back together and reuniting them by all the devastation of the war. And I find it interesting that in 1870, 5 years after the war, in the aftermath of the war, that Congress gets together and it does pass the first federal holiday law and basically makes Christmas an official holiday. And so, what had once been before the Civil War was just a variety of many different traditions and many different things, you now have an essential tradition that comes about because of the war having separated people, and that maybe Christmas would help reunite people back together again.
I saw a related story here that President Trump had issued, I guess, an executive order expanding the federal holiday this year for federal workers. I think including the 24th and 26th. I know that's not coming through Congress, so it's not permanent, but you see, I think that's a good thing, giving people more time with their families. I remember years and years ago, back in a past life, I worked at a bank, and if I remember correctly, it was just the 25th. That was it. So you were back in there the 26th.
Well, and because the problem is that we're a society that is so focused on money and the economy and business that you think about it, Christmas will be on the 25th and the 26th. It's another shopping day.
Yep.
Everybody is now, playing on the return of gifts that you didn't want.
Mhm.
And so you don't really have that stopping point. I do think we've started to see more businesses closing on Christmas. For a while there, they had reopened again, if you will, but I think we're kind of getting back to at
Mhm.
least the one day off. But I do like that. I know that there's probably a lot of things that would not be universally liked by the current president, but this would probably be one that would be,
Mhm.
currently or liked. It would be interesting to see if that would be a law or a bill that would be pushed by Congress. Would it get unanimous support? Or would there be a few who would say, no, that's too much.
You're
You
always going
can't.
to have a few.
Right. And so you go back to this idea of, why, I mean, because I think that's great. 3 days, it's federal workers,
Mhm.
who would receive that opportunity, but it's something that's needed. But then I guess somebody would say, well, I need the bank, or I need this, or I need that. How am I going to get money, or what I'm going to do? So
Yeah, like you said, people going out on the 26th to return presents or use those gift cards that they've got. Of course, I guess a lot of people, Amazon.com. So they can
yeah,
do that.
I will say it's a whole nother podcast topic, but I will say that in all of my Christmas shopping this year, 99% of it is online and is
Mhm.
not in a brick or mortar store.
Yeah.
And it's because it's ease and convenience. And
Yeah,
I'm
because
willing to pay the little extra for the trucks to come to the house and drop off things.
where we are, it's 40 minutes either way, if not a little longer, to get to large shopping centers, stores, and things like that. But I have noticed, Chris, a lot of restaurants, a lot of like smaller stores are closing on Christmas, and I think even Walmart's closed on Christmas this year. So that's a good thing. Well, anyway, very interesting topic talking about Christmas during the mid 19th century and a little bit about Christmas today. We hope you will share this podcast, give us a like on Spotify, give us a like on YouTube, share wherever you listen, share us with your family and your friends. We'd greatly appreciate it. Until
Yeah, I do
but,
think before we sign off, because I think you've left our listeners waiting on something. I mean, I think you should
uh-oh.
offer them a Christmas present because you told the story and you've set yourself up for this. You told the story about the nursing home and that you would go Christmas caroling at the nursing home and that you stopped it because you didn't want them to have to experience that. Well, I think America wants to know how bad is it? And so maybe you should end the podcast with just singing one of the traditional hymns for them so that they could, you could have a survey. Was it really that bad? Or did you do injustice to the people in the nursing home by not going to sing?
It was a great injustice. This is what I will say. My gift to America is I'm not going to sing.
And
Uh, I
I'm
might
sure.
going back to an episode we did around Halloween. I might go out into the cemetery and sing and see if anybody digs their way up to the top and tells me to be quiet.
Well, they might not dig their way up to the top, but whoever's visiting in the cemetery might also
Yeah,
say, could you please stop and give
yeah,
rest to the weary?
yeah. And bring the
But
bring the paddy wagon while you're at it.
yeah, but anyway, we do wish our listeners a very Merry Christmas,
Yeah.
and we are extremely grateful for their support this year. I know that we've had a lot of new followers that have joined us, and we appreciate those new followers. We've had, I know, some unique podcasts this year, and so we want to encourage our listeners to take a few minutes as we near to the end of 2025 and tell us what they really, really liked, maybe what they would like to see more of, or maybe what they would like to see less of. But just as an opportunity to kind of help us as we move into 2026. We are so grateful that people take time to listen. They could choose any other podcast, but you choose this podcast to listen to on a commute or exercising or whatever it might be. And for that, we simply say thank you from the bottom of our heart. The greatest Christmas present that you could give to us is that you take a few minutes each week and you listen to a podcast of two just simple, ordinary guys who are just talking a little bit about the history you didn't know but should. So we say thank you.
Absolutely. And we'll talk to you next time.